Dear listeners, I present to you what I experienced in the years 1986 and 1987 during my time in the Army. If I were to describe this period of my life, I can tell you that it was one of the hardest times in my life. And now let me give you more details about this period in the Army so I can introduce you to the situation back then. Because in order for you to better understand how God works and how wonderful He is, how important is it, so that we learn the lessons we go through and draw the conclusions that need to be drawn and change our lives as God leads us, even if sometimes we have to suffer as well. I can tell you that he was drafted into the Army in 1986 at the Tank Operations Unit in Murf Atlar. It used to be called Basarab, or at least the station was, since I always knew it as Basarab, but now I'm not sure. But now I looked at the map and I see that it says Murf Atlar. After finishing the training period at this operational tank unit that lasted about a month and a half, all the platoons of beginners, or those of us who finished and took the oath, were taken. I was taken, and we were moved to another military unit, still in the same commune, Murf Atlar, for work. So there was a camp there called Valea Sieka Camp, where 2/3 of the camp were workers with their families, and another third was fenced off separately. And there was a military engineering unit. That's right. These were barracks because they weren't brick buildings or anything. They were just plywood barracks. Each one had 2 levels, the ground floor and the first floor. These barracks had no heating at all. The civilians or the civilian side with their families heated with electricity. They made some bricks in which they dug a trench, put in a heating element, and warmed themselves. That's why fires often happened, and there were many victims who didn't manage to get out of these barracks and burned alive there. In our unit, nothing like that happened because it was strictly forbidden to make fire or anything like that, and there was no heating at all. So nothing could happen because we didn't have any heating. That's right. In these military units, let's be clear, in this military unit where we were assigned, we didn't have any weapons at all, so we were taken there strictly to work. So we didn't have any kind of weapon, not even those who were guarding, or the soldiers, because it was our turn to guard this military unit, but without weapons. So basically we were unarmed. That's right. And now let me introduce you more to this part about the military unit so you can understand what it was. So there were companies, platoons, and squads. So a company was made up of about 5 platoons. Each platoon was made up of 3 squads. Each squad had 14 soldiers. So the whole military unit was around between 850 and 1,200 soldiers. Sometimes there were more, sometimes there were fewer, depending on how the enlistments were done and how soldiers went home. So the work schedule was something like this. We would wake up at 5 in the morning, go to eat until 6, and then until around 7 it was again. The morning roll call. After that, we would go and get on the trucks and be transported to the workplace. So I can tell you a few words. The transportation was done so these trucks were covered with tarpaulin, but the back was open, and all the dust from the road, because we were transported on stone roads, actually chalk, not stone, but chalk, and it raised a dust that got inside the trucks, and, excuse me, it shook very hard, so we traveled about 15 to 20 kilometers. I can't tell you exactly. That was one way. So we were loaded into these trucks with about a platoon in each truck, and we were taken to the workplace. After that, again, each group would go separately. So the workplace was called the section. It was a certain section of the Danube-Black Sea Canal, and it was called the section. We worked at section 47, so I think a section was between 300 and 500 meters, but I don't remember exactly. That's about how I imagine the length. And in each section, There were soldiers assigned to work. In a moment of honesty with the veterans, because we were considered rookies, yes, with the veterans, I asked, if you compare prison with what we're experiencing here in the military unit, which one seems harder to you? And to this, the soldiers, most of whom had come from prison, said, it's much, much harder here than in prison. Man, in prison we worked, but we just worked for show. We didn't work as hard as we do here, and we weren't forced to meet such quotas. Now imagine having an 18-year-old person, yes. So at 18 years old, weighing 52 kilograms, and you have to prepare him. You put him on a quota of 8 cubic meters of chalk to dig per day. So just imagine what kind of work that was. Or to have 2 soldiers load a 22-ton cement truck. Just think about how exhausting that work was and what it meant for those soldiers. So that's why I compare this period as being the hardest time in my life, and I think everyone who was there would say the same. But let's move on, and I'll tell you more details about the army, after which we'll get into the spiritual part as well. But let me tell you more details. First, the food. You should know that we ate black bread. So what did black bread mean? It was a sticky, sour bread that normally, in civilian life or at home, we would give to the pigs. So we didn't eat it because it wasn't edible. But in the army, that was our food, so we never got white bread. For us, white bread, a piece of white bread, if we ever managed to get some from someone, it felt like we were eating an incredibly delicious cake. That's how it was. After that, in the morning, let me tell you about breakfast. Breakfast was something like this. It was a tea made from burnt sugar and water. So it literally tasted like the rag we used to wash the dishes. So it had a taste. If you can imagine, it was a bad taste. There was nothing good about it. One time when I went to Popota, I don't know if they called it Popota. Okay. I was on duty there just so I wouldn't give anything else but that washing taste, so the tea would have a different taste. I broke some branches. So apple, because it was winter. Without leaves, so just the apple branch. And I put it in and boiled it there in that caramel, and it had a different taste than the washing taste. At least it tasted like wood. And the apple really gave it, so the apple branches gave it a different taste than it had before. Okay, that was my invention while I was on duty at the cafeteria, okay? In the morning, I would eat a cup of tea and a slice of black sour bread. And they would give us something else too. Very little, I don't know, a small scoop of omelette or a tiny piece of marmalade. So the food was very, very poor. We also got spinach. And once out of curiosity, I took it because some civilians still had, some had duck. I tried some spinach, but otherwise didn't eat it because it was just dirt and sand and would break my teeth. I took some spinach I wasn't going to eat and gave it to the ducks. Surprisingly, even though they were always eager for food, especially bread, they didn't touch it. So they didn't want it. They came quickly because they thought it was something good, and they put their beaks in that spinach, shook their heads, and left. So even the ducks wouldn't eat it. So that's how it was. At 10 o'clock you would get a dessert, a little piece of marmalade. Who knows what marmalade means? It was a mix of pears and apples with jelly, water, and sugar, and it was this kind of thing. Krikosa. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. With how hungry we were, it seemed like the best. The best food, just a bit of marmalade, okay? Let me describe the clothing to you some more. So after I came from the tank military unit, they changed my clothes. So we had some very, very bad clothes on us. Everything was hanging off of us. Imagine that we didn't wash for months because there was no way to wash. There were some dirty padded jackets worn for 5 or 6 months that you worked in every day. Filthy and torn, and they were like the worst beggars. The boots were all torn and so on. In the winter they would freeze because we didn't have any heating. They would freeze. And when we went to work, we would put them on and they were stiff like boards until we warmed up a bit and they thawed. The same with our pants. Mom, I can also tell you that there were some who were weaker in spirit, and when we went to work in the morning and all our clothes were frozen on us, they would even make us sing. Let me tell you the song. We are called the brave defenders of the homeland. Let me sing a little so you get the idea. We are the brave defenders of the homeland. It's our name. The rifle and grenade. We handle, we face the rain and the cold, we build a road, famous builders, something like that. As they sang, some of the more faint-hearted would cry. So they cried. Just think, we were frozen with frozen boots, sleeping in frozen rooms with 10, 20 degrees inside, right? And we dressed in frozen clothes, and they also made us sing these songs. That what great builders we are. And some were crying. I can tell you that some people were cutting their wrists. It probably sounds crazy to you now to hear something like that, but I'm telling you that's what was happening in our unit. And whoever was weaker in spirit would cut their wrists. I don't know. Then I decided in my mind and I said, I will not stay in Romania. Whatever happens, I will leave Romania. And as you will find out in the next videos, I actually had 2 or 3 attempts to cross the border, and they heard about it there too. They shot at me and so on. But I will tell you about that another time, and how God spoke to me in the most critical situation when I was beaten and almost fainted. But I will tell you about that another time. Now let's get back to the army. So there were a lot of accidents, and now I'll tell you about an accident that happened. So, a platoon that was made up of 3 squads of about 14 soldiers each, although a squad could have 16 as well. So there were about 50 to 54 soldiers in each platoon. They would set up boxes, and because the bank was unstable, a row or a whole panel of boxes fell over a platoon. They all died except for one, who was now our colleague in the same group. So all the soldiers died. An entire platoon, and only one soldier survived, who was with us, and he was a veteran. We were rookies. He was a veteran. Well, in the whole platoon there were about 80% veterans and only about 20% rookies. Imagine what kind of life we had, for those of you who know what that means. So beatings were an everyday thing. The bosses, or those who were supposed to protect us, were all our soldiers or NCOs who were veterans, and they treated us very badly. We washed their boots. We washed their socks. Just imagine how bad the socks smelled after a day of work. Some boots were all torn and wet and so on. And we washed their socks. But I can tell you that I didn't hate them for that. And they noticed that I didn't hate them. And then they didn't give me work to wash their socks anymore. They saw that I washed them with spirit. All right, and I would put them at their feet or underneath. They were already sleeping, and I would slowly put them under them so their warmth would dry the socks. That's how the socks would dry. They saw I gently lifted their feet to avoid waking them. They noticed I cared about them, so they stopped giving me the sock washing chore and gave me other tasks instead, since that was the worst job. Those who seemed angry or did it out of hatred, they were the ones who washed the socks. That was the most humiliating thing, to wash the socks. It's not just the socks. There's more, but I'm keeping the story low-key and not telling you everything. Okay, let's move on to the accidents. So this platoon completely died one day, and there was only one left who was with us in the platoon. But just so you know, it's interesting how the situation changes. What happens to this soldier who after all managed to escape? Don't forget, let me tell you now what happened to this soldier. So despite all this, after going through such atrocities, another disaster came upon us, Chernobyl. It was exactly during the Chernobyl period, and suddenly I noticed that the military unit, the officers, were very agitated, and I didn't know why. But they never told us to protect ourselves. They looked up, glanced around, and seemed very agitated. I noticed that they didn't come to work with us. They let the soldiers go. We didn't know why. They were preparing for what was coming. A short cloud came, and there was a heavy, brief rain, and then it passed. As a soldier, I followed the safety rules. The other soldiers would throw away their helmets. We had protective helmets, right? Made of plastic. They would take off their helmets and walk around, even though it was clearly against the rules. I still followed them to show what respecting rules means. I followed the rules and kept my helmet on. Even though it was really hot and I was sweating, I kept my helmet on. That short rain came and it rained. Those who had taken off their helmets, it was radioactive rain and we didn't know. Chunks of hair were falling from their heads and many of them were taken away, and I don't know anything about them anymore. So they took them and brought them to be treated, I don't know, because chunks of hair were falling from their heads because of the radioactive rain. But because I kept my helmet on, I didn't have that problem. But what happened? My clothes got wet, and imagine that I kept those radioactive clothes on for months because we didn't know there was radioactivity, because nobody told us. We didn't know why their hair fell out. So we thought it was because of the heat and that a colder rain came. We made up all kinds of scenarios. We had no idea about radioactivity. We didn't know what happened at Chernobyl. And now, if I were to criticize myself for that period, it would be that if I had known, at least I would have thrown away those clothes, not walked around for months with them, radioactive, with that radioactive water on my neck. I know that radioactive water ran down my neck too. But on the other hand, my hair didn't fall out and I didn't lose the hair on my head. And now let us tell you about another accident that happened there, from which we can learn even more lessons. Yes? I want us to get into the spiritual part. But still, before that, let me tell you that this video or this little film I'm making, I want it to be in memory of my fellow soldier. Pop 1. This soldier, Pop Ioan, was an only child and he was from my group, although he came as a rookie. But what happened? At one point his parents came to the military unit and of course they must have brought something for the officers. They must have talked to the officers about what happened to him because that soldier was no longer sent to a certain area. In fact, he didn't even get to spend a single day in that area. Because the parents came right after we were moved to this military unit. They came and must have bribed, I think, or maybe not to be so harsh. They must have given gifts to the military officers. Okay, because this soldier, Pop Ioan, was taken and brought to the mess hall. What does that mean? That he was serving the military officers in the mess hall. So he would bring them food to the table, clean, help with cooking, and so on. So he had a very good life. Why? Because he had access to white bread, which for us was the best cake possible. White bread, which in fact we didn't have access to, but he had access to white bread and to other kinds of food, which were much better. But by the fact that he got there, having direct contact with the military staff, he started to no longer feel like a small fry. So, to be in a higher position and to behave strangely. The first strange thing that changed in Odata was that he was even taller than us. He was better built. Eating at the mess hall, he had a red face, while all of us were pale. By the way, because of the exhausting work and not eating enough, we were very pale in the face, right? And you could see on us who worked more or less, so those who unloaded wagons with crushed stone were very, very pale. How did they choose? It looked like they sent the weakest and smallest there. I don't know why. They were very pale. Whereas this soldier, who only ate at the mess hall and didn't work at all, was very red-faced, chubby and healthy. He looked good, but he was required to show up for roll call in the morning and evening, and only then was he with us, so he joined the platoon. Otherwise he wasn't there. So what happened? He always had, because we would look in his suitcase. He had white bread, canned food, everything he could get from the mess hall. That's how it was. Don't forget, so it caused hatred among the veterans. Because the veterans lacked white bread and his food. I even overheard him talking with the sergeant. The sergeant was also a soldier. Yes, a sergeant. But he was in charge of the whole company, so he had 5 platoons under his command. So 5 times 5, about 200, 300 soldiers. I think there were 260 of us. Yes, 260, 270. It varied. Around 300 soldiers. And I remember when the sergeant said, "Hey, Ioan, give us a loaf of white bread every now and then." And he said, "No, eat the black bread. That's for the soldiers." He was also mocking the sergeant, which was very rude. And I told him, Hey, Pobi Ioane, don't act so tough and don't put yourself above everyone else. First of all, you have to show respect to the sergeant, because he's still a sergeant in charge of over 300 people, so you have to show him respect. The funny thing was that the sergeant was short, and this Iowan guy was very tall and solid. Well, the sergeant was short. I said, look, no matter what, you show him respect and give him a loaf of bread. It's not hard for you to give him a white loaf, because here we don't get anything either. Give that guy a white loaf, it won't cost you anything. Take out 2 slices and show some respect, man. Not to eat black bread. So he behaved very funny and strange. After that, now comes the most interesting part. Every morning, or almost every morning, he had nothing else to do except with me personally, but I don't know why. He would come to me and say, "Hey, Teodor Borota, don't you see how weak and small you are? Well, you're going to die in your sleep. You won't come back alive from your sleep." And I said, "Hey, don't keep talking like that. It's like a curse over your head. Because to me, sleep doesn't seem hard." But every morning, almost every morning, he would bother me with these words. He would come to me, look at me, "Hey, don't you see how weak and small you are? You don't see yourself. Do you really think you'll come back from your sleep? Well, haven't I heard once that you were brought back in a coffin from your sleep? That you don't want to stay there for the hard work?" And I said, "Hey, I don't think the work is that. I've gotten used to it, even if it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I've gotten used to it. And it's not that torturous. Other soldiers were beaten. Here, I'll tell you about a soldier. They were beaten almost every day. Let's take a break so I can tell you about another soldier. There was a soldier from Maramurish who is now a teacher, but I won't give more details, I could describe him to you, but I won't say more so this video doesn't reach someone and harm him. So that soldier was a bit different from the others. That's what I can tell you. Every day he was beaten, so when we went to sleep every day he was beaten. He was hit with kicks to the liver and stomach, beatings to the head, every day. So I actually sat and wondered how much longer this soldier could endure the beatings he was given. So he was born a little different, and because he was a little different, he was tormented a lot. And I met that soldier in Bayamare, and when I saw him, former soldier, I was happy. I wanted to go to him and greet him. And I said, "Hello," but he said, "Don't come near me. Leave me, leave me." Wait a second, I didn't do anything wrong to you." "Leave me, I don't want to see you." "But why not when I did nothing wrong?" She replies, "Seeing you reminds me of the hardest time in my life. I don't want to see you or remember that." That was the soldier. I sit here and think that maybe this country should financially reward these soldiers who had an extremely hard life. I think that's how it should be in a normal country. So what they went through there was far beyond anything I could imagine as a person. Before I went into the army, I went to someone who had just been discharged and lived not far from our house, and I asked him, "Hey, tell me, how is it in the army?" He was the only one who told me the truth. He said, "Hey, have you ever been beaten so badly it felt like dying?" I looked at him. Man, what's wrong with this guy? I want to go to the army to see weapons. I liked weapons. "Well," he says, "hey, wait, the army isn't what you imagine. So if you think you can handle some beatings that are like death, then you should know that's what the army is." He didn't exaggerate at all. I could even give you his name to thank him, as he was the only one who told me the truth. So the only one who told the truth. So some things happened that are far beyond our dignity as human beings. Yes, it's undignified to be beaten when innocent. How are you guilty for being born in Romania? How was I guilty for ending up in a unit with prisoners? But still I can say that I didn't get beaten that much. That I got off pretty easy, because I worked and showed kindness. Now I recommend to you, kindness is always welcome, and so is humility. These are 2 things, humility and kindness. That saves you from a lot of suffering. Okay, let's get back to our soldier, Pop Ioan, who, poor guy, ended his life in his sleep. What he said would become a curse. So not once, not twice, but dozens of times he would come in the morning and have no one else to talk to. And he would say, "Hey, you're my comrade. Why do you keep saying these things to me?" But he wanted to show that he was above us. He was above because he would go to the mess hall and didn't work. But I said, "Hey, you'll curse yourself if you keep repeating that." And he kept saying, "Barota, you're going to die." "Well, you won't come home from sleep anymore." And I said, "Hey, don't say that." What happened? I was later transferred to another platoon and didn't have to deal with him again. And I don't even know the rest of the story. Why did he end up in a sleep? In a sleep, I mean at work. I don't know why he was fired, or if he was fired, or maybe he was just sent to work for a short period. I can't tell you. What can I tell you? That on the first day he went into a sleep, meaning the first day he went to work at the canal, he died. So on the first day he lost his life exactly as he used to say about me. Now, well, this is a tragedy. Think about it. He was an only child. So just think about the blow his parents took when they heard their son had died at the canal. I had access to the photos taken by the forensic investigators. So I had access to the company commander, who was a major lieutenant, a career officer. I don't remember exactly. I've forgotten now. So I actually got to his office, and being alone, I was looking at the photos from the forensics team, and I saw what had happened. So my colleague, Ioan, was hit on the head. He was placed on a narrow concrete slab and covered with a board so it wouldn't be visible that he was hit on the head, as if he had been put there to sleep, but in reality he was dead and had been hit on the head. I thought maybe he had been thrown off the boxes and rolled over, since he had several injuries, not just one. But the pictures were taken as if the person who was working on at least would have hit him with the hook, which I don't think was the case. But let's not get into details now. So what I can tell you is that we have to be very careful about what we say and what we wish for others, because it could happen to us. Here's a case where that's exactly what happened. So Soldier Pobioan died on the first day he went to work at the canal, and on that day he didn't go to the mess hall anymore. I don't know why this happened, why he was taken there, who hit him, what happened. But he was brought back dead to the military unit, after which I don't know anything else about him. When his parents came, I didn't even go there because I didn't want to see their pain, since he was their only child. That's right. For this, I will continue with drawing the conclusions from what I experienced and what I saw when God spoke to me. So you can see how wonderful God is, even in the most critical situations of our lives, and how he turns our curses or sufferings into great blessings. You might say, how is it possible? Well, God can do it. And this is just one example of what's to come. As for the soldier Pobioan, I personally would like God to judge him with great mercy. Think about it. He was between 18 and 19 years old. He was probably already 19. So a young man at 19, you can't really say he thinks very much. Now, if we look in the scripture also says, inexperienced young men, inexperienced young men. So a man makes mistakes also because he is inexperienced. He's put in situations where he must choose, and he decides for himself. An inexperienced man doesn't know how to act in a certain situation, so I pray that the Lord will judge him with much mercy in everything he has done. But still, so that we may learn something from what happened, I would like to read to you from Romans 12:14. 12 cu versetul 14. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. So what is Apostle Pavel encouraging us to do here? And even in the most critical situations, we should not curse people. We should bless them. We should bless them. So this is the advice that Apostle Pavel gives. So even if we were among those persecuted, we must bless. And this is Apostle Pavel's exhortation for us, to bless and not to curse. Or if it comes to our lips, if we are put in a critical situation, we should not curse, regardless of whether that person has or you have a reason to be upset with him or not. And now here's another proverb. I want to read to you Proverbs 26, verse 2. Just as a sparrow flits about and a swallow flies, so an undeserved curse does not come to rest. So on the other hand, we shouldn't be too afraid of curses either, because if a curse is undeserved, it won't come to pass. But regardless of whether it comes to pass or not, we shouldn't curse. So we shouldn't curse. And we shouldn't be afraid of curses either. So let's keep our hearts pure before the Lord, and He will protect us from these curses. I would like to read you another verse in Proverbs 26:27. Whoever digs a pit for someone else will fall into it himself, and the stone will roll back on the one who rolls it. So, let us learn from what happened. Let us not be among those who dig a pit for others. Or let's be careful, because the one who rolls a stone might have that stone fall back on him. So it says like this, and the stone rolls back over the one who rolls it. So let's not be the ones who start anger or are the initiators of revenge or anything like that, because it can happen that the stone falls on us. Now, I'm not judging what happened with Soldier Pobian, but I told you what I saw. May the Lord have mercy on him. And that's how I want to go on, to tell you that, as you also know, God knows how to reward our suffering, both here on earth and even more so in His kingdom. He will bless us. So the kingdom of God, there He will bless us. Sometimes He rewards or turns a curse and an unfavorable situation for us. He can turn it here on earth as well, in our favor. Why? So we can see how He works. But what's even more certain is that God will turn these unfavorable situations in our lives. In His kingdom, they will be rewarded to us. Look, there's a word or a verse written somewhere. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So our life must be a period of trials and of tasting, of testing, of contacting God in extreme situations, so we can see how good He is. And now I'm going to present you with two situations, one that's less amusing. And now it may seem very strange, but you should know that at that time it wasn't such an unusual situation. I can tell you that after a while I also became a veteran in the army, and a new group arrived. And we were 3 veterans sent to be group leaders and to work with those, as I said, rookies, with those who came later into the army. They were younger in the cycle than us. And these new ones, the newly enlisted in the army, were full of lice when they arrived at our unit. And of course, the first thing, they were checked, they saw they had lice, and I shaved their heads. But what happened? We, the veterans, also got lice. So I got covered in lice. And now it was quite an awkward situation for us to get a haircut. We, who were already squad leaders, to shave our heads bald like the rookies. Because the only difference between us and the rookies was that we all had the same clothes, just as torn and dirty. But at least we, the veterans, had hair on our heads. That was how you could tell us apart, not because we had ranks or anything like that. But that's how our appearance was different from the rookies. We had hair on our heads, nothing else mattered. So it was a critical situation because I got covered in lice. And now I was supposed to go to, I forgot what the unit doctor is called, but I forgot what the infirmary is called. To the infirmary. And of course, the first thing they did was shave your head, and then they gave you some solutions to put on your head and so on. But I didn't want to do that. I said, Lord, I prayed, and I said, Lord, I really wouldn't want to have my head shaved to be humiliated like that. I would like to keep my hair because I will be released, and I would like to be released. 0. And I prayed to the Lord, and suddenly I felt in my heart. Now, let me tell you, in the army, we didn't have any stores. Maybe it sounds strange what I'm telling you from there. There were no stores for you to go to or time. You didn't have time to go out in the city or shop for yourself. You just didn't have time. But when we went to eat to the canteen was inside the camp. So outside the military unit, so outside the unit, outside the military. And we went to the canteen. And it came to my mind very strongly. I prayed to the Lord. I didn't want to get a buzz cut. And it came to my mind very strongly that, you see, God takes care of the small things too, not just the big things. Now, the exception is when you are being tested in a certain situation. Of course, then God doesn't answer to see what you will do, because you are being tested. But with the lice, it seems the test wasn't for me. I wasn't in a test from the Lord like that. And it came to my heart to go to a certain family. And I thought, well, how can I go there and make myself look? It's so embarrassing to even tell them that you're full of lice. But I said, well, I'll go ahead, I'll go. And while going to the table, I passed by this table and went to that family. It was a Christian family with several small children and so on. I went to them and stayed, talked with them, and now what should I do? Well, I'll tell them. I said, look, I got covered in lice, and I really didn't know where they came from. He said, it's no problem. Here's half a liter of alcohol. You go, you wash yourself with it, but without water, only alcohol and soap. Rub it well into your scalp as much as you can stand. Afterward, you rinse with cold water since there was no hot water in the showers. So don't think the army had hot water for us to bathe comfortably. It was either once a week or once a month, I think once a month. And it was in a certain room, so you had to go there. I can't tell you everything because I want to keep the morality of the film, so we washed ourselves with cold water. So he said, look, here are these half bottles of alcohol. You wash yourself, scrub well, but only with alcohol. Endure as much as you can, and then rinse with cold water. You wash yourself with water. That's what I did. And I did it twice and got rid of the lice. The Lord cares for me, even in small ways. But let me tell you something bigger and something that I like, and how God turns the ugly or hard things in our lives into a blessing. You should know that He will do the same in heaven. What we experience here on earth, the hardships and the trials we go through, God promises to turn them into blessings. Let me tell you what I experienced. I was in an area where I worked very hard, working with a tool for digging called CEA 14 for those who know. For those who don't know, let me explain. It's a kind of pneumatic tool. So instead of using a pickaxe, because if you used a pickaxe, you would only get a very small piece of chalk since the chalk was very compacted. So we used the jackhammer, right? With a pneumatic tool that hammered with a spike. That way you could get more, you didn't get as tired, and you managed to meet your quota. And I worked in the army with this tool, the CEA 14, and what do you think happened when I was a civilian? After I came home, a few years passed, I privatized, I had my own company, and I produced these tools and I'm still making them. So the jackhammer tools, so I'm still making them now. We're a small company. I don't produce that many, but still. So I'm still making them. And I worked hard. After what I went through in the army, I managed to make money. So I was the only one in the country at that time who was making pneumatic tools and drills for mining that are used internally to make holes in the rock, right? With this, you would dislodge the rock with the CEA 14 or these digging tools. I also produced something else. Okay, so I ended up making really good money from what was the hardest thing for me in the army, digging with these drilling tools. So God can turn a bad situation in our life into a blessing. But we have to be patient, and there's still another secret. You have to be content in any situation. And in a difficult situation, that's when you are ready for God to give you a blessing. When you are content, if you are dissatisfied all your life, and no matter what happens, you keep grumbling and are dissatisfied before the Lord, then you shouldn't expect God to change the situation you're in. Because you're still in a trial and haven't finished yet, you have to pass the trial so that God can bless you. But I won't go into details about this now because we have another topic. I would also like to tell you that, it's very easy to say you were lucky or what happened was just a coincidence. You should know that personally after the spiritual growth that the Lord has given me and after what I have understood from the word of the Lord, there is no such thing as luck or coincidence. Luck means blessing, and coincidence means the hand of God in our lives. But if we use these words, luck and coincidence, it is proof that we have unbelief in our hearts. We speak like this to deceive ourselves and to quickly solve problems that we don't want to see. Luck we find quickly. Because we are obliged to believe in God, and because we don't want to believe in God, then we say, oh, I was lucky, or oh, this situation was a coincidence. So I advise you not to do that, to know that we have only one life in which God, no matter how close or far you are from Him, God helps you grow spiritually. And even when you are far from God, God takes you by the hand like a child and pulls you and arranges the situations around you in such a way that you choose what is good for eternity. That is God's purpose. And in all the situations where you would want to say luck or coincidence, it is actually the hand of God in our lives. Luck means blessing. Coincidence is seeing the hand of God working in our lives. Now, we also have to pay attention to these things and understand that this whole world was not created by atheism, but by God. God created the world, not atheists and not Satan. God created the world, and we have to believe him at his word, because he gave us the word of the Lord, which is the Bible, and he gave us the guidance of the Holy Spirit, who is with us every day and everywhere. Let me read to you again from John 16-33. Look at what John says here. I have told you these things so that you may have peace in me. In the world you will have troubles. Take heart, I have overcome the world. So you see what awaits us even as Christians. What does the world have in store for us? In the world you will have, I have told you these things so that you may have peace, so that we don't lose our peace. That's why the Lord Jesus told us, so that we don't lose our peace. I have told you these things so that you may have peace in me. In the world you will have troubles. Take heart, I have overcome the world. So what is Jesus teaching us here? That we are in the world, we are tested, and we will have trials. But we should not lose our peace and calm in him, because he has overcome the world and we must overcome it too. So what does it mean to overcome it? To master our lives and not let curses come out of our mouths, not let despair come over us, and let peace remain upon us. Because we are not the ones who rule this world, and we won't take it with us. It will stay here. We are only learning. We are in, as I like to say, God's perfect school, from which no one can cheat. What I'm saying is very interesting. You should know that even those who die for a short time and are taken to eternity, to hell or to heaven, even they cannot cheat. They can't bring anything from there because God does not allow it, so they cannot cheat. And they are given according to the faith that we have and that they have. Because God is just with all people. Here it's a school where you absolutely cannot cheat. It's God's standard. It says that if we believe strongly, we see that everything around us works for our good. Who's good? For those who believe. So I advise all of you to believe, so that the world and what happens around us will be for our good and not for our condemnation. Let me read you one more verse. Actually, two verses. We find them in Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 and 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed will you be when because of me people insult you, persecute you, and say all kinds of evil and untrue things about you. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So what is the Lord trying to tell us here? If we endure trials, if we are patient, a great reward awaits us in heaven. And when God says this with his own mouth, then we can be sure that a great reward awaits us in heaven. Much greater than these small rewards we see here on earth or receive here on earth. Think about it. Many of you work, maybe very hard and a lot, and for that work you receive a salary. And you're not always satisfied with how much you receive. Or maybe sometimes you are satisfied. But don't forget that the real reward comes only in the next life, not here. There we will receive the real reward for the work we have done on earth. So now we receive a partial reward. A little, but God will give us the real one. And when he says this, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. They persecuted the prophets before you the same way. So what does he say? Because your reward is great in heaven. May God help us like this and help you too, dear listeners. Thank you for watching me, and I hope you will watch me in other videos as well. Goodbye.